Up North in Winter by Deborah Hartley, illustrated by Lydia Dabkovich. It gets cold up north in winter. Some nights, it's so cold folks could freeze to death, my dad says. My grandpa Ollie lived up north a long time ago when my father was a little boy like me. Times were hard back then. Grandpa didn't have very much money. He worked all day from sunrise to sunset to earn only $1 for his family. Hard work never hurt a man, my dad says. The winter of 1911 was the worst. Grandma cooked mostly deer meat, rabbit, potato soup, and kale. When Grandma's cow, Snow White, stopped giving milk, even that old cow ended up in the soup pot. Folks have to eat to live, my dad says. There was no work nearby that winter, so Grandpa took a job in another town. He rode the train there every Sunday night and rode it back on Friday evening. A man has to find work where he can, my dad says. One Friday night, Grandpa worked late. When he got to the station, the train had gone. The night was icy cold. Home was 12 miles away, following the road. Cutting across the lake made it only 6. Grandpa headed for the lake. He put his sack of clothes over his shoulder and lit up his pipe. In the distance, he could see the lights of his own town, about a 3-hour walk away, when he started across the frozen lake. Halfway home, dog tired and pretty near frozen himself, Grandpa stumbled over something on the ice. He looked down to see a big fox lying there dead, but still warm. My grandpa knew he could get $10 for a prime fox pelt. He would have to work 2 weeks for that much money. Grandpa's heart started pounding hard. Sometime a man just gets lucky, my dad says. Grandpa stuffed his pipe in his pocket, picked up that fox and wrapped it around his shoulders to protect himself from the wind. Finding that fox gave Grandpa new energy. Now he walked on much faster through the icy night. He smiled to himself. $10 would sure help fill up those bare pantry shelves. Grandpa finally reached his home. Shivering and exhausted, he set the fox down outside the door. He thought how worried Grandma must be with him being so late. He could just imagine the look on her face as he showed her his prize. He gave a knock. Grandma opened the door, and at that very moment, the fox jumped up and shot off like a cannonball across the yard. That fox wasn't dead. It was just been too cold to move. Grandma said she was thankful the excitement of finding the fox brought Grandpa home safely on such a bitter cold night. That old fox might just have saved my grandpa's life, my dad says. Life's funny like that, I always say. It sure gets cold up north in winter. Tokyo Digs a Garden by Jon-Erik Lappano, pictures by Kellen Atanaka. Tokyo lived with his mother, his father, his grandfather, and a cat named Kevin in a small house that stood among tall buildings. Tokyo's grandfather had lived in the small house since he was a boy. He loved to tell stories how things used to be. Then the house looked like over the hills, and forest, and meadows, and stream. Deer grazed on the hills, foxes ran through the forest, birds sang in the meadow, salmon leapt in the streams. But now, all of that was gone. Tokyo's grandfather said the city had eaten it all up. Cities had to eat something, after all. One sunny afternoon, Tokyo and Kevin were playing on the doorstep when they heard the music of an ice cream truck. Kevin jumped quickly over the gate. Kevin loved ice cream. But when they got to the street, they saw there was no ice cream truck at all. Just an old cart pulled by an old bicycle, pedaled by an even older woman. The cart was not full of ice cream. It was full of dirt. Kevin was very disappointed. The old woman held out her hand. She was holding seed. "Plant these seeds," said the old woman, "and they will grow into whatever you wish." She dropped the seeds into Tokyo's hand and continued along the road. Tokyo shrugged, put the seeds in his pocket, and followed Kevin back to the house. At lunch, Tokyo put the seeds on the table. Grandfather looked at the seeds. Then he looked up at the small piece of sky peeking out between the tall buildings. "Today is a good day for planting," he said. Tokyo gulped down his glass of water, pretending he was a city drinking up a deep, cold lake. Tokyo went into his backyard where nothing was growing, not even a weed. He looked at the ground and wondered where to plant the seeds. A little bug crawled slowly across the bricks before disappearing into the cracks. Tokyo had an idea. He lifted the brick, and underneath was cool, sandy soil. He made 3 holes with his finger, dropped 1 seed into each, and quietly made his wish. Then Tokyo covered the seed with dirt. That night, Tokyo dreamed he was riding an old bicycle through the city. All of a sudden, he turned into a fox, and the buildings changed into tall, creaking pines. Kevin dreamed of ice cream. The next morning, Tokyo heard a bird singing. When he peeked out his window, he saw 3 small wildflowers sprouting up from the bricks in the middle of the yard. He ran to tell his grandfather, but when he got to the kitchen, Grandfather was already staring out the window in disbelief. "Nah," said Grandfather, shaking his head. "I've never seen anything grow so fast." And Tokyo's garden kept growing. After breakfast, the bricks around the flowers were completely covered with soft, spongy mush. By dinner, 3 trees had grown, and the moss had become a meadow of wildflowers and shrubs. By the next morning, the garden had grown up and over the building, across the street, down the road, over the cars, and into the expressway. The day after that, huge trees towered over the apartments. The strong roots broke the pavement, vines climbed skyscrapers, water poured from hydrants, flooding the streets and turning them into rivers. The day after that, the city was completely wild. Deer foraged in office lobbies, rabbits burrowed under library carpets, bison stampeded through traffic lights, bears climbed telephone poles to reach honey where bees had made their hives. Tokyo, Grandfather, and Kevin lay on their back in the yard, which was now the middle of a deep, dark forest. "This garden is much too big," said Grandfather, shaking his head. "The cars can't drive because the street is full of jumping salmon. Your mother had to take the old rowboat to work today, and there was a sloth in the elevator at your father's office, so he had to take the stairs. What are we going to do?" Tokyo thought for a moment. Kevin's tail twitched. A pack of monkeys swooped from branch to branch in the canopy above. "I think," said Tokyo, "that we will just have to get used to it." Grandfather watched a flock of cranes flying across a small piece of sky, peeking out between the trees. He remembered how it was as a young boy. He would watch them fly overhead before winter settled in. "I think you might be right," he said. "Gardens have to grow somewhere, after all."